having that opportunity, being forced to think about those things, I saw many of the issues and things that I experienced during those deployments that, for example, I was not at fault for our losses and the people that were killed, which I was around. We did collectively everything we could. And it was just a terrible situation that I had no control over. But I had never viewed it that way until I had that time. But yeah, man, that was a long, long answer to those two questions. But highs and lows on that trail, brother.
Welcome to the EQ Gangster podcast, where you will learn practical tools to grow your mental and emotional health and intelligence to be the best version of yourself, both at work and at home. It is real, raw, and transformational. The journey of emotional growth isn't easy, but it's worth it. I believe in you. This episode is sponsored by Arrowhead Leadership Consulting. What are your organization's biggest pain points right now? Low EQ leaders, weak managers, toxic culture, high turnover, low engagement, leader development, lagging behind company growth, no company career path. Let us know if your organization needs leadership coaching, workshops, training, or keynotes. Visit arrowhead-leadership.com for more details. Arrowhead-leadership.com. How are you, Big Jason? It's good to see you, bro.
You too, brother.
Man,
Happy Monday.
the legend.
I don't know about that, but man, I'm looking forward to spending some time with you, bro.
How many Air Force Rangers are there out there?
Ooh, I think there's around 300 if I'm right.
Really?
Our first two airmen went through, I think it was 1955. We had two airmen graduate, and the Air Force used to, I'm not sure if it's still that number, but we used to get 6 slots per year to go. Now, that would be outside of the number like the TACPs assigned to an Army organization or something like that, because they would slide under Army slots. But just standard airmen, we were getting 6 slots a year.
Wow. And what rank were you when you went through?
I was a staff sergeant. I was the second oldest guy in the class. So I had been in creeping up on, well, I hit my 10-year mark right after graduating.
Okay.
So I was a young NCO, and yeah, but I had a lot of reps and sets because it took me 4 times to get through the selection course. Yeah, I 2 injuries. One, I fell asleep. I let my team down. I let my instructors down. I let myself down while I was on a graded patrol in pre-ranger, and so I got the AC again next year. But that 4th time I went, I had my academics and my physical stuff in line, and yeah, 6 years to the day from my first pre-ranger course. I was standing down at Fort Benning for day 1 as the only Air Force guy in the class.
And you were how old when you went through?
28.
And what was your MOS in the Air Force?
I was a security forces airman. I was a canine handler for the first 12 years of my career.
Okay.
And yeah, I got lucky I was stationed in Panama, and I was fortunate to be, our squadron would send a team. The Army's Jungle Warfare Course used to be down there, and at Fort Sherman. So I got to be one of the lucky ones to go to that course, and I got attached to a company out of the 101st. And that's the first time I saw, the platoon leader and the platoon sergeant had ranger tabs, and there was just something different about those guys. And I was like, hey, man, I mean, their leadership, their presence, their connection with their soldiers and us, it was just like, wow, okay. I'd never experienced that. And went back, and I was telling the guys in my squadron about it, and our training NCO was like, hey, man, Air Force, you can go to that. And I was like, whoa. So hey, a few months later and a whole bunch of push-ups later, I'm standing in the middle of the Nevada desert wondering what the heck I got myself into, because they're going to make sure that they send the right airmen to not only represent themselves and their MOS or AFSC, but the entire Air Force, because all eyes are on you when you go, and all the other service and the international students as well when you go to the Army show.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Wow, that is awesome.
Yeah, it
We
was great. They lost my luggage too, man. So, I flew from, I was stationed at Fort Dix, New Jersey before it was Joint Base McGuire Dix Lakehurst. I was an instructor up there. And I flew down to Charlotte and I was flying Delta and saw a whole bunch of other guys with shaved heads that had come from Fort Bragg and came up to them. They're carrying all their stuff. I was like, "Hey, you guys going to Ranger School?" And they're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "What about you?" "Yeah." "Okay, what do you do?" I'm in the Air Force. And they're like, "Oh, okay. What are you, TAC P, PJ, combat controller?" I was like, "I'm a canine cop." And they're just kind of like, "What the hell?" Weird relationship at first, but it turned out okay. But yeah, Delta lost my bags, bro. And so day one, I'm the only Air Force guy in the class, and I'm standing there in my civilian clothes. And as you can imagine, it was just absolutely game on, man. So it was a gut check from the start, and but it turned out that, the Air Force, we I would offer, do a great job of getting folks spun up on orders and things like that. So as soon as we got to that portion, they're like, "Oh, okay, Air Force guy, he has his stuff together." So and those bonds of people I've run into that were my classmates. I had the privilege or honor, I would say, to go be the graduation speaker for the 20th anniversary of my graduation. So I graduated in class 200, and then I went to class 220 because one of my pre-ranger instructors, who was we would have all airmen that were ranger qualified plus an army guy from usually Benning. Guy was a staff sergeant. And at the time, I heard he got commissioned. I jumped with him one time when he was a platoon leader in the 82nd after he got commissioned. And then he was the brigade commander for the Airborne and Ranger Training Brigade. And just out of chance, I was on a Defense Senior Enlisted Leader Council, and I'm sitting next to Sergeant Major of the Army on a bus. This is when Dan Daly was the Sergeant Major of the Army. And he's like, "Hey, man, you ought to go speak at one of the graduations." I was like, coincidentally enough, I had been trying to get a hold of the TRADOC Command Sergeant Major who was in transition to say, "Hey, man, my 20th anniversary is coming up, and I would like to give back because I gained so much from that experience. I want to show some love to these young, aspiring leaders, and put some context to 20 years later, what that did for one person." And yeah, when the Sergeant Major of the Army calls, it could be helpful, maybe not. But I call down there and I'm like, "Hey, I'm not trying to push this. I'm not trying to force this. I would love to do it if you want to, not because Sergeant Major of the Army said so." And it turns out that a guy who was a staff sergeant at my first pre-ranger was, had commissioned, was the colonel, was the commander of the whole brigade or battalion and or brigade. And it was just it was so awesome. Go down there and he gave me all my copies of my paperwork from when I was a student, and man, what an amazing experience. So I had someone took my tab out of my office when I was the command chief master sergeant at Air Force Materiel Command. Why someone would want to do that, I don't know. So I didn't have my tab that I had pinned, and I asked them if I could have another tab. And while I was down there, turns out there was an airman in the class who I was the oldest still serving active duty Ranger qualified airman, and I had the youngest pin me. His dad was there. I mean, it was a cool experience, man. I could talk about this stuff all day, but yeah,
that's
it was great.
that's amazing. Wow. What an amazing opportunity.
Oh yeah,
I mean, everything that you shared, to be able to go through Ranger School, but then also to be able to speak
yeah,
20 years later and then to have the youngest pin you, that's incredible. That's amazing. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah.
So you have so the you know the audience, EQ Gangster audience
Mhm.
is, we're all about leader development and
Yep.
emotional intelligent leadership and emotional intelligence, emotional health and everything. And clearly, Jason, you have, you have been um you're, it just seems like you're wired differently than a lot of people, right? So for an airman to say, oh man, here are these two high-speed army guys with ranger tabs, like let me sign up for that kind of deal, right? That's,
Mhm.
there's some folks kind of make that, that kind of decision making process. Many don't pursue discomfort,
Mhm.
um, right? And a lot of us, and heck, in my life, sometimes I've chosen discomfort. Many times I've chosen comfort
Mhm.
over discomfort. And of course, you don't grow in your comfort zone. So, um, and even outside, right, in your personal life, I find it fascinating that you're a monster hiker, right?
Mhm.
Not just your average, like, oh, hey, I like to go on a little couple day hikes, or bebop, for a mile or two. Like you have trekked, and I'll just read this from your bio here, completing three of America's national scenic trails: the 2,650-mile Pacific Crest Trail, 486-mile Colorado Trail, and the 165-mile Tahoe Rim Trail. And then you share your insights and experiences from your 5-month hike from Mexico to Canada in your book, 5 Million Steps: Hiking the Pacific Crest Trail After 3 Decades of Service to Our Nation. So, dude, like, please share your journey.
Yeah. Yeah. So the book that you mentioned, and I appreciate you mentioning that, it's an account of my life journey. It's written through the lens of my hike on the Pacific Crest Trail, because that was a childhood dream that when I was 8, growing up in Washington State, I was at my grandmother's house and she had the old school hard copy subscription to National Geographic magazine. And I had a pretty rough childhood, and she was the one, that made the biggest difference and had the most impact on me. And she sat with me and read that. There was a 30 something page article about the Pacific Crest Trail. It accounted the first person that had done it. And the article was from 1971, the same year I was born. And she sat with me and I saw the photos and her excitement. And she was the first one that told me, I could do it. I could do things. She was the one that was the one light in my life for many years. And yeah, so I always had that in my mind, right? And that's one of the stories I tell in the book. So the journey, 17 different chapters about life, leadership, love, being a father, being a husband, being an airman, having a rough go with some emotional health issues, rough childhood, success, gratitude, comparisons, those things that we all face as humans, as leaders. And yeah, I didn't know what I was doing, man. So I came back from this amazing experience and I was like, how can I capture this? How can I share this with people? Because what I learned on the trail, which is one of the things I loved about it the most, what I enjoyed the most about my 31-year career in the Air Force was the connection with people, especially as a younger leader and a mid-level leader. I struggled with my identity a little bit at the end because I became my position rather than the person that was behind those stripes. Became very transactional, not by choice, but just by nature. And I missed that. Well, I got a taste of that on the trail because we were all out there, vulnerable, experiencing these sometimes good, sometimes challenging conditions. We were all in it together. It didn't matter who we were in our everyday lives, whether financial status, educational status, social status, however you want to measure that. We were just a group of people out there doing some difficult things, enjoying such greatness out there and beauty and everything that trail just breaks you down to your core. It's just that the experience was amazing and the people were the best part. So I love that about it. So I came back and I was like, hey, how can I share this? So what I did was I kind of noted or wrote down the most memorable experiences or impactful experiences I had on the trail, how that related to a life experience, and then the so what. And it just turned out to be 17 chapters about 17 completely different things and some reflections in there. And yeah, it's that life journey, brother.
What's one of the highlights and or lowlights
Mhm.
from from that experience that you could share?
Yeah, the highlights were the connections with people, and there's so many examples I can use. The gratitude I had for my family that was different because I deployed a lot. My wife also, she was an active duty airman. She retired about a year and a half before I did. Um, we both deployed quite a bit, and this was a choice. So I felt a certain way. I felt a little bad, to be honest with you, because I retired 4 years ago on April 1st. I retired. That was my ceremony. I turned 50 the following week, and I started the trail the following week. So, a little over 2 weeks from stepping off the stage, I'm on the trail, and I was like, what kind of guy goes away from his family after, 10 deployments total, me, seven after meeting my wife. It's a lot of time away, and some challenging deployments, and just step away. And I was like, wow. Well, to stay sharp downrange, as I'm sure you know, when I was downrange, I would sometimes not want to think about my family because I needed to stay sharp. I needed to make sure that I got myself and my team through some challenging, sometimes dangerous situations. And that, the way my mind works, it's like, hey, and I hate to use the word distraction, but I had to eliminate these distractions from my mind to stay sharp, do what I need to do, get back. So I would, schedule my time with my family. I would, back when I was deploying a lot, this is before FaceTime, and I would have a video chat every once in a while, or I would read letters, write emails, and things like that. Certain times of the week. The rest of the time, I'm focused. But what I found was the gratitude I had from them out there was different. It hurt a little bit more because I could think about them as much as I wanted to. But that pain also, it turned into a greater and deeper appreciation because I didn't have to delay those thoughts. I didn't have to delay talking with them or chatting with them. I had a satellite receiver, a little GPS two-way deal. And, just a deeper gratitude for them. On the low end, so I had a rough go and had to seek mental health after knowing I needed to for many years. Was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder and went through some pretty extensive therapy to help. Right after years of compartmentalizing and thinking that I was protecting my family by not putting my burdens on them and sharing with them some of the experience, also wanting to protect the innocence of my sons and not letting them know of some of the bad things that go on in the world, plus wanting to be that strong father and that strong husband and not show that what some viewed as weakness. And it took me a while to understand that seeking help is actually there's strength in that. Also, the leader, I was an E9. I was the command chief master sergeant, similar to a garrison command sergeant major of the second largest Air Force base in the world when I went and sought help. And I was like, man, what are these people going to think of me? And once I got past that, I went and had my therapy, and I knew that you don't get the time and place when some of those thoughts return. And a very difficult portion of the trail in Northern California, I was a little more than halfway through. I went to a really low spot. Wow. And for the first time in my life, without distraction, I had the time and space to let my thoughts and emotions play out without interruption, without having something to go to distract me. I was forced, literally and figuratively, to sit in my stuff. All I could do was keep going north on this trail that was punishing me, wildfires, 109 degrees outside, and I just had to sit in it and endure it and get through it. But what I found was having that opportunity, being forced to think about those things, I saw many of the issues and things that I experienced during those deployments that, for example, I was not at fault for our losses and the people that were killed, which I was around. We did collectively everything we could. And it was just a terrible situation that I had no control over. But I had never viewed it that way until I had that time. But yeah, man, that was a long answer to those two questions, but highs and lows on that trail, brother.
Yeah, I can only imagine what lessons or lesson is from that experience
Hmm.
is the most relevant to you today.
Mm. Being in the moment and slowing down and not worrying about what's next. Now, those are three different things, but they're very similar. And I use the experience that I had in the Sierra Mountain Range, which is one of the most beautiful places that I've experienced in the United States. And I hit the highest point on the Pacific Crest Trail, which is a place called Forester Pass, 13,200 feet. I went over that. I was thinking about my sons. It was just this great experience. I got to the top. It's about 800 miles into the 2,600 mile trek. And man, I was just on a high up there. Well, I'm a planner by trade, or not by trade, but by nature. I look at things linearly. I'm very time focused. This leads to that, and that's just how I organize my thoughts and in general my life. And I went off of this amazing experience. And then later that day, I was going into a town called Bishop, California, but I still had a lot of hiking to do that day. And I went for what's called a zero, where you hike 0 miles during a day. So every week or so, I would go off the trail and go into a town to pick up my resupply, whether it's something that or things that I bought in a grocery store, or things that I sent to myself, or things that my family sent me to sustain me for the next stretch. Well, I went into planning mode and I walked an entire day, brother, through some of the most amazing, scenic, beautiful places in our country, and I don't remember any of it because I was just looking down. I was like, okay, I need to get to this point on the trail by this time. This is how fast I need to go. These are how many climbs and how many feet I need to go up because I need to get here by this time so I can do this. I'm going to drop off my laundry. I'm going to walk across the street to this Mexican restaurant. Then I'm going to go get some ice, some frozen yogurt at this place that has wine too. I'm going to go back, put my stuff in the dryer, go shop. I'm just thinking about all this stuff. And I got to the bottom. I was like, man, what am I thinking? So I go back and, it's hard for me not to get emotional when I talk about this, but I went and went into the town of Bishop, spent my day off, went shopping, came back to the trail, a day later. And it took about 8 miles to get back to the actual Pacific Crest Trail because it's a side trail. So I got up there later than I wanted to, and I knew it's going to be dark soon. So I'm walking, and I finally get to a point where I was about a mile short of getting back to the trail. And I took a break and I went out to this ledge, and it's actually the photo on the cover of the book, that not a lot of people know about this, but um, I went out and there's this beautiful scene in front of me, and I was like, man, this is amazing. Sat there for a few minutes, but I was like, I gotta go. I gotta get those miles and go back to the trail. So I stopped short, took my break and got back on the trail. And I got a little bit down the trail. I was like, you know what? I'm gonna camp there. Let me just go back. It was this rock ledge, just this perfect site. The illumination was low, so the stars were bright. There was no light pollution or ambient light from any cities. I cowboy camped, so I just slept on the ground without my tent. I woke up, stars so bright. It's just incredible, right? Well, I wake up in the morning and I'm making my morning coffee, and I had lost track of the date. And so I'm out and looking at drinking my coffee, and I'm watching the sunrise on the Sierra Mountain Range. I look over at my watch, and brother, it was the 20th anniversary of my grandmother's passing. And I'm having this cup of coffee, seeing this incredible view that I would have missed had I not pulled my head out and tried to be more present. And I go back to that, quite often now when life gets me spun up, or I have this task saturation or these things that I'm trying to do even in my retired life. Those pieces in life that sometimes tempt us to step away from being present. And I reflect back and focus on that when I'm kind of slipping a little bit. And I see that photo because it's a screensaver on the computer that I'm looking at right now. And I was like, you know what? I need to slow it down, embrace this moment, man. Because those things, when it's gone, it's never coming back, you know?
That's right. Wow, that is a powerful story. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely.
So, and I appreciate your vulnerability. I want to kind of go back a little bit
Mhm.
with, so there's a lot of people that struggle with anxiety and
Mhm.
anxiousness and that kind of thing. And man, I appreciate you sharing about kind of your journey. I just heard an episode from a retired two-star general who, it's something called the schizophrenic general, or the, it's something like that. He
Mhm.
bipolar disorder general or something. And he's very vocal, but I'm not saying it's not the same. Obviously, it's the same thing. But the point is, he didn't discover his some of his mental emotional health issues until he was a general.
Yeah. Yeah.
And he also kind of shared that one of the reasons he was so successful is because of his, I guess it was some like a manic, like he would
Mhm.
go have these episodes where he would just 2 or 3 days no sleep and just crush it. And in the military, that's like lauded, right? Like, hey,
Yeah.
great job, you're the man, like look how
Yeah.
hard this guy is. And so he would just get celebrated. And so he didn't, again, man, I'm getting promoted, I'm crushing it. But then the wheels started to come off. and
Mhm.
and so one question, Jason, would be, how did you get to the point where you had the courage, or like what, because a lot of people still have the stigma of like, oh, that's weak and da da. It's like,
Mhm.
no, dude, like you don't get through Ranger School by yourself, right? The
Mhm.
same thing in life. A lot of people, oh, I'm self-made, dude. Somebody sewed into you. I don't
Yeah.
care, even if you had a terrible childhood and all that stuff. Somebody came along, and So how did you get to the point where you sought help
Mhm.
for whatever was going on?
Yeah. So took a couple or a few years. So, I was a newly promoted chief master sergeant. And I was sitting at this is the first time I knew, like really knew that, man, you need to get it together and you need to get some help, right? So I'm sitting at the dinner table, and I describe this in there are two chapters in the book, kind of, the down and then, coming out. Uh, I'm we were stationed in Las Vegas and we're sitting there having dinner. My sons were very young. And I don't know what made me think of this, or where, why my head went this way, but I was trying to remember the names of the fallen that I knew. And I had this feeling, there seemed to be a period of time, I did 4 deployments to Afghanistan and 3 to Iraq. And there were a series of those where every time I was around, it seemed something bad was happening. That folks were dying, that just like, man, okay, anytime Jay's around, bad stuff's gonna happen. And I know that's not realistic, and I know that's not, did not contribute to those things, but I just felt that way. And for whatever reason, I was trying to think of those names and I couldn't, and I just had the first breakdown that I ever had, mental health related, right? So I'm just like, start sweating and shaking, and I was almost throwing up. And I look down and I'm crying, and I look up and I see the look of fear on both my sons, I have 2 sons, their face. And I was like, oh man, that didn't make it better. And my wife, she stood next to me, and I kind of jumped, but like the smell of her hair kind of got me kind of zeroed back in a little bit. And I got past that, and I apologized to them for that. And but I didn't explain because I really didn't understand what was going on. Well, I felt better a little bit later, and then for a few days had headaches and was throwing up, and those kind of things, just want to sit in the dark. And shortly after that, I was selected to be a command chief, right? taken out of my career field and put in these, leadership positions. And for the first time, because what I didn't know was the value in being around your tribe and how you build coping mechanisms, oftentimes through humor, to share and cope with, your peers, your tribe. I knew that was happening, but I didn't know the full value of it until I was away from that. And all of a sudden, they were great people, but they didn't understand me the way my brothers and sisters in the career field that I came from did. They didn't have the same experiences. They didn't, see those same challenges. They didn't have that same growth path, which is fine. Again, they were great people, great leaders. But man, I'll tell you what, I was on a cycle for so many years that I was deployed, coming back, getting ready for the next one, going to the next one, coming back, getting ready for the next one, jumping out of airplanes, doing all this like high energy, high, adrenaline stuff. I didn't realize I was on a high from that. That's how I describe it. And I didn't realize that once you come off of that, things could happen. You might think a little bit different. I didn't even know I had to prepare for that. And man, it slammed me, right? So, my struggles continued, and there's this one night, the low point, and I went to, my wife and I had a date night, and one of the things that really, really got to me was the hypervigilance piece, knowing how many people are in the room, watching the door, and all the things, right? Well, we went to this restaurant, and we're sitting there, and we're chatting it up, and even though it sounds kind of silly and I don't understand how my mind works to do this or anyone's, but I couldn't hear her. She's sitting, 2, 3 feet in front of me and I couldn't hear her. And she's talking, but I could hear the plates in the kitchen. I could hear the couple talking a few tables away. I could hear the hostess greeting people. I could hear all the things but what I needed to be hearing and focus on. And I couldn't, I'm like, intently looking, trying. And wow, that's tough for me, but tougher for her. And I just got that look that I deserved. And man, it was a quiet ride home, and I'm thinking the whole time, man, you got to get your stuff sorted, right? So we go into the house, and for whatever reason, I don't know why it hit me different, but she went and gave the boys a hug, and they're looking over at me, and I just felt 1,000 miles away, man. I felt that I didn't deserve to be a part of that. That all the things, boom, low point. So the next morning, that night I was like, hey, okay, I need to get over it. I need to go get some help. Right. So the next morning was the wing staff meeting where all the senior leaders from across the base come in. Right. And I'm sitting there and I was just checked out. The medical group commanders is sitting near me, across from me. And I knew that after this meeting, I'm going to go tell him because I didn't want to make it uncomfortable for the mental health office that, hey, your command chief is going to go in there and, I don't want this to be weird for them. So again, I'm worried about everybody else. And man, I was checked out. And my wing commander, she reaches over because she called me because I had opportunity to comment at the end, and kind of startled because I was just not paying attention. I'm thinking about what I'm going to say. My mind's trying to trick me out of getting help. And wow, I was like, hey, I got nothing. And at the end, I walked up to him, and that was hard. And I was like, hey, sorry, I just want to let you know that I'm going to go to the mental health clinic today, and I need some help. First time I said I need help out loud. So there was a sense of relief immediately. But man, that was weird. My picture's on the wall in the clinic, right? When you walk in as, those base leaders. And, they called, it took me a while to get back to my office. They called, they're like, hey, chief, you can come in the side door, you can wear civilian clothes. I was like, hey, at this point, I'm not worried about any of that. I just need some help. So that was the path to get there, brother. But
Wow, man, thank you for sharing that.
yeah.
What have been the benefits, ripple effects, deliverables, and outcomes in your life as a result of getting help?
Wow, it's connecting with my family. I could see not necessarily immediate results because the therapy I was treated with was called prolonged exposure therapy. So you go in and the physician, uh, she guides me through. So I'm first person. I'm explaining everything that's going on in some of these situations. Then I have to listen to it over and over again. I'm breaking down. It was oof, it was rough. Not only to say it, but then to listen to yourself explaining these things later. Wow. So it took a minute for this therapy to start, helping. Because woof, that was for me anyway. That was a very difficult. But my temper. I had a really bad temper for a period of time. That's probably the first thing that I noticed. The way I'm connecting, the way I'm communicating my patience, I wouldn't lose it. Um, my uh, my cognitive ability was slipping too. I mean, I had to write everything down, which was also embarrassing too, because there are people that I'd known for years that are sitting across from me, and I couldn't remember their names if I was, having a bad day. So, man, I would have to go into a meeting or something, write down all these names, take all these notes. My memory was just trash. And so, in a bunch of different smaller ways, it built up. So now the outcomes later, I know I'm better aware of, because I wouldn't say that I'm healed or ever will be healed. Those memories, those things come back to revisit us, and we don't get to choose when. But I know mentally and physically what some of those leading indicators are, that okay, I need to be mindful of this, heart palpitations, or, headaches, or, high pulse rate, or, sweaty hands, things like that, that normally the things that I don't get, I was like, okay, well, something's there, something's bothering me. Let me explore this. And it could be, something absolutely that has nothing to do with those military experiences. It could be a stressful period in my life. It could be an upcoming project that I'm, creatively trying to get together, or something like that. Um, but those leading indicators are very helpful, and it causes me to pause, think, relax a little bit, and be the better version of myself. So yeah, but a lot of different ways there to answer the question.
Yeah, yeah. What would be some advice that you would give? So you commanded at the highest rank possible in the Air Force, and as an E9, and then, like you said, the second largest command in the Air Force. So
Mhm.
you have seen some incredible, and been a part of some incredible organizations, and you've seen some great leaders. I'm sure you've seen some bad leaders. I'm
Mhm.
sure. What advice would you give to leaders to help them in their journey?
Specific to the mental health space, or just in general?
Really, in general, like,
Okay.
how how can a leader reach their full potential?
Yeah. Yeah. I will say two answers. So our young leaders, and then the more senior folks. Um, for young leaders, I'll go back to that embrace the moment, right? Because what I found myself as a young leader, success was rewarded with more work. And there was a period in my career where it's like, okay, Jay, you've done well here. We're going to throw you over here. We're going to throw you over this thing, kind of the fix it guy. And, many of us, or I would offer, high performing leaders of all services, across the military, you're rewarded with more work, which, oftentimes we want to take on. But the risk to that is going too quickly and worrying about what's next at the expense of what you have right in front of you. Because when I look back at that, again, that 31-year career, okay, yeah, I got to do this. I achieved this rank, this position. Man, I'll tell you what, my best times were when I was an E6 and an E7, when I'm dealing with a business of, young people doing great, making mistakes. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I got to see this crap again. Why do I have to deal with this person? Why can't they pull their head out? But then years later, to see them successful when they have turned around, those things take time. And to have that true, meaningful, lasting impact at the point of relevance, when you're right in their face day to day, I didn't get that especially as more senior E9, a little bit as an E8, but man, those are the years. But those were also the years when everybody's telling me, hey, man, you got to do this to make E7. We're going to push you here. Hey, yeah, you're in E7 now. We need to start prepping you for E9, da 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 da. Okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? I wonder sometimes how many opportunities I missed to connect with someone to be truly impactful in their life because my mind is focused where everybody's telling me my mind needs to be focused. Sometimes that might seem counterintuitive because we want to be successful. Sometimes we want to progress. But the reason I share that is I would hate for people to look back and regret the things that they missed over those years because they're so damn focused on what that next promotion, that next position, that next school, that next assignment, that next thing is. Man, slow down. Appreciate and love what's right in front of you. Because at the end, when I look back, those are the most meaningful things. It's not the promotions, it's not the positions, it's not the medals, it's not all that crap. It's that eyeball to eyeball interaction, helping somebody, seeing them through a tough time maybe in their life, and then seeing them, achieve some level of success, whether that's personal, professional, family, individual, all those things, man. So for senior leaders, I would say knowing when and what is enough. All right. This might be the second time I'm saying this out loud, but it proves the point. I had the opportunity to compete for two very senior positions toward the end of my career, not implying that I would have got either of those positions, not implying that I was the best candidate, not implying that easy button, Jay would be that. I had the opportunity to interview for the SEAC position and the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force position. And I'll tell you what, when those things, especially the Chief Master Sergeant of the Air Force deal, I knew the call, was going to be made when I had to say yes or no, whether I want to interview or not. And how my family and I approach things is like every time we would have another opportunity, I was the primary driver of our family's assignments because I was typically one stripe ahead of my wife. And so we would sit down even before our sons understood what the heck we were talking about. All right, is this what we want? This is going to be the estimated cost and time away and travel and all the other things. Do we want to continue? The answer is yes, we're moving forward. I'll tell you what, when it came to those two though, although it was an honor to even be asked, I could not have looked my wife and sons in the face and said, "Hey, guess what? Either of those positions, hey, Dad, if I were to get either of those, hey, I'm going to be gone 300 plus days a year consistently for 40 years during the time in my son's life. Our youngest son is 15, our oldest is 20 now. I couldn't be away for those things. I knew what enough was. Sometimes I see and have experienced leaders, not only in the military, but in this corporate side as well, that continue to say yes because they haven't put intentionality or thought behind what is enough. I just want to keep going because that's what the system tells me I should do, or that's what the perceived measurement of success is to go as far as I can. Although that might not be the best thing for everybody. That might not lead to fulfillment and satisfaction, and it might not lead to your family being in the front row at your retirement ceremony. You know what I mean? So those are the two kind of split that up for young folks and older folks. So being in the moment and knowing what's enough.
Excellent, powerful, powerful points. How do we, so wrapping up here, Jay, how do we follow you? How do we find you? Resources, website, a book, LinkedIn? How do we connect with you?
Yeah, the best way I spend the most time professionally on LinkedIn. So Jason France on LinkedIn, you'll see you know, that photo I told you about, you'll see a picture of my book on there. Um, so that's typically where I, you know, communicate with folks. You know, my book, again, 5 Million Steps, Hiking the Pacific Crest Trail After 3 Decades of Service to Our Nation. It's available on Amazon in paperback, Kindle, and I had the chance to narrate my own for Audible. Now you have to search for those because you know they're in actually 3 different places. But those are on there. I'm a little bit on Instagram, you know, JF Adventures, but yeah, most of the time is on LinkedIn. That's the easiest way. That has my contact info on there as well. But I appreciate you asking.
Jay, thank you so much for your insights and your wisdom and your stories. Um, Very grateful that God crossed our paths,
Me
however
too.
long ago that was. But I really appreciate you sharing your very transparent journey and very applicable journey with me and the audience.
Absolutely, man. It's been a pleasure. Thanks for what you do. Thanks for what you share. Man, you are making an impact and a difference in so many lives. You know, I hope you hear thank you enough for what you do,
Mm,
brother.
mm.